All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Quadel Training for today's overview on mobility webinar. My name is Seth Embry, and I will be the presenter today. I'm a senior associate at Quadel, and I began at Quadel, I guess, about 3 years ago. I started with Quadel. I was actually hired to manage a mobility program that Quadel had been selected to design and operate. And then after the contract ended, that agency took the program in-house and continues to operate it to this day. And since then, I've been working with a lot of the other consulting projects that we have. So I have a background personally in the HCV program, in the public housing programs, moving to work, uniform relocation, permanent supportive housing, and of course, mobility and counseling programs. Now, Quadel, I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Quadel, at least in the mobility work that we do, hopefully, and that's why you're tuning into this webinar. But additionally, we've been working with PHAs and other providers of affordable housing for more than 38 years. We provide technical assistance, program support services and training to these agencies, and also individuals who are interested in the trainings that we offer. We offer comprehensive trainings for the affordable housing industry. We have also been a leader in designing and operating programs that provide high quality and effective mobility counseling services for more than 20 years. Our success in delivering these mobility program services is really a direct result of our understanding of and ability to address the barriers HCV clients must confront. We have participated in and witnessed the evolution of strategies and services in this area, and we have an understanding of what works and what doesn't work in really an affordable housing and fair housing climate that's always changing. We both managed and supported a wide range of mobility programs. One of the ones, I guess our longest running and probably most well-known program that we managed was the Baltimore Special Mobility Program, which was created as a result of legal action brought against the Housing Authority and HUD. That program has been studied extensively, and it's widely seen as a great example of what can be done when housing authorities have the maximum amount of flexibility in administering a voucher program. Other examples include an education-based housing mobility program in the Seattle area, a regional mobility program in Southeast Pennsylvania, among many others. And we're currently engaged in the design of a statewide mobility program in New Jersey and conducting an assessment of an existing program in Minneapolis. Both of those projects I'm currently working on. So enough about me and enough about Quadel. Let's talk mobility. So today's agenda, well, our goal really is to provide you with an overview of what a mobility program is and some basics about how you or your agency can build one. We're going to begin with an overview. So I want to talk to you about what exactly a mobility program is. And my goal is to show you that mobility programs are fully customizable and reflective of the local area in which it operates. Those local characteristics come from defining goals. So we'll talk about setting goals. What can your mobility program achieve? Well, really, maybe we should ask, what should your mobility program achieve? And the answer to that question will be driven by a conversation at your local level with stakeholders. One of the things I want to emphasize early in this webinar is that successful mobility programs do require collaboration, both within your agency and with organizations and groups outside of your agency. Now, some of these groups and of people and organizations are really going to have diverging goals. And on a regional program that I personally helped design and operate, this was the case. But together, we really built something that worked, and we made sure that it was a family-centered program, and that sharing of a common goal is what will ensure success and successful collaboration. Because we can't forget, at the end of the day, mobility programs can produce significant change at the family level in the household, and the needs and wants of households really need to be at the forefront of this whole design process. And so that's going to be what we talk about when we move on to the third bullet there, which is building a mobility program. So we want to talk about what are the components of common mobility programs, and how can you reflect or how can you operate a successful program that reflects the resources you have available. Lastly, we're going to discuss measuring success. As I mentioned before, Quadell operated the Baltimore Mobility Program, and it's been studied extensively. And information from that and other mobility efforts are really used to make the case for more programs, for funding, and to enlighten practitioners as they endeavor to create more mobility programs across the country. That's only possible because there was a lot of documentation and data collection. We will talk about that because at the end of the day, you want to know that your program is meeting its goals and doing so efficiently, and you want to be able to improve your program, identify areas that are strong, identify areas that need improvement, and therefore serve your families better. So we'll move right along, and here we're going to talk about an overview of a mobility program. What is a mobility program? As we'll see, a mobility program can take various forms depending on local goals and conditions, but at its core, a mobility program is one that provides information and support to families seeking to relocate to communities of opportunity. A mobility program, or the idea of mobility, is not about creating a mandate to families. The program should really be voluntary, and that's been shown to have the greatest amount of success when it's voluntary. And then on top of that, oftentimes we're talking about mobility programs, if not always, in the context of the HCV program, and we all know that the C in HCV stands for choice. And so this is not in any way about restricting or eliminating a family's choice about where they want to live. In fact, mobility programs actively and purposefully increase the number of communities in areas in which voucher holders reside. So we're going to talk about the various outcomes when we talk about goals, but it's important to know, just generally speaking, that living in high poverty communities is detrimental to a family's health and economic well-being, and this fact is at the foundation of all efforts to increase housing mobility. There are going to be obstacles, resistance, and even possibly discrimination encountered by families, but a good mobility program will anticipate these challenges and proactively implement solutions. So when you're designing, as I'll talk about later, when you're designing your program, you're going to think specifically about the target population and how you can, to the best of your ability, ensure success. So why housing mobility? As I said before, we already know that living in concentrated poverty tends to produce negative effects and outcomes for families. This is well documented. Research does suggest as well, when we talk about concentrated poverty, that there are certain levels of poverty that act as tipping points, and we can call them thresholds. And communities of poverty, communities will look differently. The effects of poverty will look differently depending on the level, the amount of poverty. Communities of high poverty have higher crime rates. They tend to have worse educational outcomes, and residents of those communities experience increased health problems, including mental health. There are also economic effects such as declining property values, which really then in turn create other problems. So when I talked about the thresholds, those economic indicators start to show up at about 10% poverty, but the effects on a family start to really show up and increase sharply between 20% and 40% poverty rates within communities. Now, research does attempt to differentiate between the neighborhood level characteristics and family level characteristics that encourage negative outcomes for individuals. And so what we mean by that is, while an area of poverty and the area of crime and school performance will impact the family's chances for success and attaining opportunity, so will family level characteristics such as the level of education attained by parents, such as any involvement in the criminal justice system, the presence of mental health or physical health challenges. Those are going to affect family members as well. And so research does try to say how much of the poverty is affecting the family, how much of the family characteristics are affecting the family. But it's important, just for our purposes, that we understand that moving to a better neighborhood is not going to have the effect of waving a magic wand for a family, but you can increase a family's likelihood of success with pre and post counseling, pre and post move counseling, that is, and we'll discuss those later. But so when we talk about constructing your program, the first thing that we want to talk about is setting goals. And by goals, I mean the outcomes, the desired outcomes for your program. So you want to think about this in terms of the impact that your program is going to have on families. What outcomes do you want to seek? There are many options for this, and I have some of them here on the screen, such as reduced neighborhood poverty, higher quality education, better employment prospects, and increased health and safety. So mobility programs can seek to impact, as we see, economic, health, education, safety, or other family conditions. Knowing what's important to the families and communities you serve has to be your starting point. Finding out what those things are, what's important to the families you serve and the communities that you serve, requires communication, requires collaboration, and these are themes that are going to run throughout the design and operation of your mobility program. How you define an opportunity area will depend on your desired outcomes. Now, just to define that term, an opportunity area, generally speaking, is going to be the areas that you decide to identify as receiving communities for program participants. And we'll talk in a little bit about how you define those areas. But if you're looking, for instance, for an outcome as better educational opportunities for children, then you might focus as identifying opportunity areas as particular school districts or school catchment areas. For employment prospects, you may focus on helping households move closer to job-rich areas. Generally speaking, any mobility program is going to start with defining areas of opportunity as those with low poverty, and it's up to you, within certain commonly accepted frameworks, how you define a low poverty area. But on top of that, you'll overlay additional neighborhood characteristics depending on the goals and outcomes desired. Now, to give an example, the mobility program that I managed for 2 years with Quagdell, we did start with low poverty as, again, the foundation of the definition of opportunity, but we always also wanted to consider the educational prospects for children in the household. And so what we did was, by analyzing state data on schools in a district, in a particular district, an urban district, we were able to identify which schools had better performance based on standardized testing. Because in the urban areas, depending on your geography, it'll change. But what we found in this particular urban area was other common indicators like the ratio of students eligible for free and reduced meals was tremendous at pretty much every school. And so if we use that as a benchmark, which a lot of programs do, a lot of research points you in that direction, the results would be only a handful of schools were eligible to be identified as opportunity areas. And so we looked at the performance and we compared that across the district, and the schools that performed best we identified as areas of opportunity as long as the poverty rate was below the threshold that we identified. So that's one example of how you can overlay neighborhood characteristics on top of the poverty level that you're seeking families to move to. Lastly, you see there we have solicit input from stakeholders. And again, this communication and collaboration is going to be important. So once you have an idea of the desired outcomes, you want to think about who your target population is. You want to think about the households that you serve and are likely to serve, because they're going to have specific needs and desires. Going back to the example I gave with helping participating families move to areas with better schools, your target population is going to be families with school-age children. Now, you could look at that and say families with children in elementary school or older, or some programs even look to target families whose children are just about to begin school. So I guess we're talking about 6 and under, because their idea is to help families' children start in a high-performing school. And so that's an idea as well. But when thinking about your target population, always think about their needs and also think about the potential barriers they will face. That information will guide you as you think about the types and intensity of counseling services you will need to offer. And so later when we talk about counseling, we'll delve deeply into that idea about intensity of services and types of services. But you'll want to have that information in your early stages when you think about the target population so that you can more easily figure all of the counseling stuff out at that time. So we talked about the idea of opportunity areas in terms of outcomes. Again, the opportunity areas will potentially be different if you are focusing on economic self-sufficiency or health and safety outcomes. But what's important here is to know that there's data available to help you find the neighborhoods that are most likely to lead to your desired outcomes. What we're showing here on the side opposite the text is the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Mapping tool. If you haven't seen that, if you haven't used that, if you're not aware of it, if you just Google AFFH mapping tool, you'll be taken to that website. And this tool provides you quick access to a variety of maps for your jurisdiction. And here we have a shot of a few of the maps that are offered there, from the location of housing choice vouchers to school proficiency and all kinds of things. And it's a really, really great tool, and I encourage you to use it even if it's a starting point, even if you're just playing around to, think about your community, not even in the context of a mobility program. This is a really great tool just to get information and insight. One of the other things here that they have is a map of persons by language. So when you think about your community and you have an LEP plan, limited English proficiency, they have a map that shows you the common languages, the amount of foreign languages spoken in your community. And so that's a really great map also to key in on. So using a map like this or other mapping softwares and data sources, which I'll go over in the next slide, you want to identify which of those areas are actually accessible to families. So let's say that you go and you use a map and you have your criteria, your outcomes, you have the poverty rate that you selected, and then you're thinking about educational attainment or proximity to job centers, and you identify a couple dozen communities, let's say. You still need to look at those communities and figure out if they're actually accessible to families. So what's the availability of rental housing in that area? What's the cost compared to what your payment standards are at the housing authority? So this will give you insight into which of those neighborhoods are actually going to be able to be targeted as receiving communities. Additionally, as we mentioned previously, you still need to consider the needs and challenges of your target population. What challenges will they face in moving to new neighborhoods? And you also want to do an analysis to compare the amenities and resources in sending neighborhoods to receiving neighborhoods. Think about things like grocery stores, hospitals, public transportation, libraries, recreation, and things that your families might frequently use, we'll say. And then so once you've done that, you're able to define opportunity areas based on your criteria, based on the availability of affordable housing, based on the needs of your folks. You might at this point need to reevaluate the program components and do some tweaking to ensure a measure of program viability and success that is realistic to your community. For example, let's say that your area has a poverty rate of 14%, and you say that you want to define areas of opportunity as those which have a poverty rate under 7%. And then on top of that, you overlay the other neighborhood characteristics that you're looking for. You might come up with a really restrictive set number of opportunity neighborhoods. So you might need to go back and say, instead of 7% poverty, let's look at what we can find with 10% poverty. And that might yield a real, whole new crop of affordable areas that have an abundance of rental housing. And so a tweak like that, or to some other kind of program components, will be probably necessary once you've compiled all this information and identified opportunity areas. So in addition to the AFFH mapping tool, there are a number of other resources for you to get the data that you need to support decisions. The Census Bureau, the Fact Finder tool that they have, will provide you with a variety of data to determine housing costs, availability, rental versus owned housing, demographic information, poverty rates, and even more. It's a plethora really of information there, which can be overwhelming, but it's not as user-friendly as the mapping tool that I mentioned, but it certainly gives you all the information that you need, and it's clear, but it does take a little bit more finesse kind of to navigate through all the data and available spreadsheets. Another great place to find information to support your decisions and guide you in designing your program is your local analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. So your local AI will detail issues and strategies regarding fair housing in your community. Lastly, if you don't have the staff to handle or dedicate time to do this research, and if you haven't engaged an organization or a consulting group such as Quadell, then there are local planning organizations that are likely to have data to share with you. And you can also consider collaborating with a nearby college, which might provide these services for free. Maybe it's a student project, or maybe they have a research center that's interested in urban policy or housing policy. And so those kinds of collaborations, again, that word collaboration, will be useful to you in designing your program without having to increase costs, or without having to maybe add staff. So once you've kind of designed what you want your program to look like in terms of where the areas of opportunity are, the other thing you have to do is design the way the program will operate. And so there are four components to a successful mobility program, which we have here: client outreach, counseling, housing search assistance, and landlord outreach. With each one, your program is going to have its own level of intensity. And what I mean by that is you may emphasize, say, counseling over search assistance, for example, depending on your desired outcomes and resources available. But then also with counseling, you might provide a low level of counseling or a high level of really intensive counseling services. And so as we go through each of these components, I'll talk a little bit about some variations in intensity for your program when you're thinking about designing it. So that first bullet was client outreach. So we've used a number of methods and seen a number of methods to do this, again with intensity. So video testimonials are really popular because they're splashy, they're attractive with the colors, and you see people and you can provide shots of opportunity communities, and there's really beautiful housing and parks and tree-lined streets, and so those are great, and you can place them on your agency website, but they are costly and time-intensive to produce, especially if your agency doesn't have a media department that does these kinds of things. So to hire someone and to dedicate staff to really manage this process could be a bit much for some agencies. So there are other options like printed materials, so letters to families, posters at your agency's offices. But I would say without a doubt that once you have your program set up, person-to-person communication is going to be the most effective. So you want your staff to be discussing your mobility program on a day-to-day basis. And as that fourth bullet point says, this should be an agency-wide effort, which does not mean that that's the focus of everyone's job, but there's a part of everyone's job, or almost everyone's job, in which they can insert a little bit about mobility to get that information to clients. Again, before I go on, when you're doing client outreach, also consider your LEP plan, because you want LEP persons to be able to access your program. Obviously, you don't want to run into any fair housing issues about discrimination against folks of various national origins. And so just be consistent with whatever the guidelines are at your agency concerning reaching out to your diverse community. So back to client outreach, you want to think about when families have contact with your agency. Some things you can easily think about are voucher briefings, if you have in-person recertifications, or inspections. These can all be opportunities to talk with families about your mobility program. So inspectors, for instance, they can leave a postcard at a residence for an individual to contact your office or a web page to go to with more information. Your specialist can ask families if they're thinking about moving, and if so, direct them to your mobility specialist if you have one, or provide information about your mobility program. And even when a family calls your program's offices, your agency office, there can be a message when they're on hold talking to families about mobility. And I will add, talking with prospective landlords about your mobility program as well. We'll talk about landlord outreach in a couple of slides, but those are some options there. The goal should be for discussions about your mobility program to be as ubiquitous as workplace safety warnings or notices about fraud in your agency. So we all want to be on board with the idea, the concept, be familiar with the program. What we did with the program that I managed is we created a one-page FAQ sheet. And we did a training for all staff. And so staff weren't expected to be experts in mobility or to take a lot of time out of their schedules to work on mobility or to talk to families about mobility. But what they could do is provide basic information, provide contact information, and we also had a referral form. So if they encountered a family who said they were interested in moving, or even a family, they might have been prompted and said, "Are you interested in moving?" And if so, we had a referral form that the individual could fill out really quickly, and then the specialist could put it in our mailbox, and we would then take the ball and reach out to the family, make contact, and then get everything rolling there. So again, this is going to depend on what you do in terms of mobility staff. If you have a separate staff, if you don't, this is really going to affect the efforts that you do in this area. So that last bullet there, offer incentives for participation. Not every agency is going to be able to do this, but you should explore if you can. Do you have resources to provide security deposit assistance or other ways to make their move easier? Even though families may at your agency move frequently, and a mobility program, an effective participation in the program can be a reduction in the frequency of moves per family. But you can also make it easier for them to move with, again, security deposit assistance or something else that incentivizes people to participate, because depending on how you construct your program, it can take time and effort on the family's behalf, and you want to make it something that they, yes, invest in, but you don't want there to be too many barriers to participation. The other thing that you want to do when you're doing outreach is make it clear what the effects of living in high poverty communities are and the benefits of living in low poverty opportunity areas. Families may know intuitively that their neighborhoods, that if they're residing in a high poverty neighborhood, that it might look different than nicer neighborhoods. There might be more litter, or the parks might not be in such great condition, or they might not really like the schools and things of that nature. But they might not really pay attention to these things. You would be kind of really surprised about how much families do know. Some families are going to be really thoughtful about this, and for other families this is not going to be something that's on the forefront of their mind. But it's really your job to make it clear to say, this is the difference, this is the contrast, these are the advantages and disadvantages of each community, and then the family is going to make a choice whether pursuing a move to an opportunity area is the right thing for them. So let's move on to counseling, which is the second component of the mobility program. Pre-move, to frame this from the start, commonly we break this up into pre-move counseling and post-move counseling. So I'm going to first start by talking about pre-move counseling. And that's counseling that prepares families to interact with landlords, to be good renters, complete a successful housing search, and possibly even set some life goals to help them make the most of their move. You may even encourage, when we talk about that setting goal part, you might encourage families to set goals that reflect your desired outcomes. For example, again, using the same desired program outcome of increased educational opportunities for children, you might encourage families to set goals having to do with researching schools or looking into academic support outside of schools if their children need that, or participation in the parent group at their school. Parent involvement in schools is really important, so that might be a goal that you set. For the programs that I've managed and helped design, I always think about this in terms of pre-move and post-move goals, the same way, again, that we have pre-move and post-move counseling. And the reason I do this is because there's going to be a set of things that families need to do to get ready to make a move, and then there are going to be some different things that they'll want to concentrate on once they've made a move to their new community. So pre-move goals might include saving money for security deposit or moving costs, contacting previous landlords for references, or paying down debt to kind of get ready for this new life almost that they'll be leading. And that's how we really frame the program. It's more than just a move. It's about a new start for your family. It's about setting down some real roots and flourishing in where you are. So remember, earlier I talked about that each of these components can have its varying level of intensity. So for context here, a low level of intensity in terms of counseling isn't really going to look like counseling at all, because you're going to be perhaps providing information basic information on a range of topics, and maybe you have a monthly workshop that families can come to, and you send them home with a packet of information so that they can conduct their own search. You might give them flyers about different resources, you might identify opportunity areas, but it's not going to look like really one-on-one counseling at all. You're not going to do a lot of training, a lot of workshops, but really a minimal level to give families a context for why you think opportunity moves are good, what opportunity areas are in your community, and how they find housing in those communities. In our experience, however, effective counseling really requires more contact, more one-on-one contact, also some group work, but it has to, I think, have a component of one-on-one contact to really be successful given the challenges that we expect families to face. So things that you want to talk about with families are about their credit and rent histories, because landlords are likely, and it depends on the area, but landlords are likely going to either run a credit history or a rent history, and you can get those reports for free. You can get a credit report for free and rent history report for free. And so this is something that we would do with families. We would run those reports, we would get them, that we would discuss them, and sometimes families would need to make a plan to rectify either some credit things or know that they have a poor history and anticipate having a discussion with landlords about those. You also want to help a family decide what kinds of neighborhoods are best for them given their wants and needs, and provide search throughout the search process. Provide support throughout the search process. And we'll talk about housing search assistance next. But how often your families are in contact with counselors and how much support you provide needs to be decided. You may also decide to make participation in certain aspects of your program mandatory in order for families to receive any benefits that you provide, such as housing search assistance or security deposit assistance. Generally speaking, you should expect that landlords in opportunity areas are more selective and that they have a wider range of applicants to choose from. So you want your families, the families that represent your program, to be as prepared as possible so that your program maintains a positive reputation when folks start to hear about your program through whatever kind of outreach that you're doing. A variety of training sessions can increase both the voucher holders' preparedness and your program's success rate in terms of helping families move to areas of opportunity. So post-move counseling. Post-move counseling is important because not only do we want families to make a move to an opportunity area, but we want them to decide to stay in areas of opportunity long term. This again reflects what I talked about earlier with opportunity mobility programs can decrease the rate of moves per family in your HCV program, but also the positive effects of living in an area of opportunity really increase the longer someone stays there. A family stays in an opportunity area, not necessarily in one opportunity area, but just generally an area of low poverty, especially for the children. So the longer children can be raised in areas of opportunity, can go to high-performing schools and graduate from high-performing schools, is when we really see and expect to see the most impact of living in an opportunity area for a family. So once a family moves into a new neighborhood Consider how you can make the transition easier. Post-move support will help a family develop their own strengths and resilience, and it'll enable that long-term residency that I've just talked about. Also think about the fact that the family may be moving in with a landlord who this could be their first time renting to a family with a voucher. So what support can you provide to both the family and the landlord, which might end up being beneficial, obviously, for the family's retention of housing, but also it can lead to new opportunities for housing for other families in your program. So if a landlord has a good experience with a family based on the support that you provided, they would ideally be more interested in renting other properties, or can help you spread the word about your program and vouch for your program and participate in some marketing, such as the video testimonial that I mentioned in terms of client outreach. That's also something that you can incorporate into a landlord outreach strategy. So things to consider when talking about post-move counseling or planning post-move counseling. How long after the move does counseling last? 6 months, a year, 2 years? How will you offer counseling? How intense will it be? What kind of counseling? Will they just be check-ins, or will you do more goal planning sessions, follow up on credit issues? What exactly do you want to achieve once someone moves? Will you have mandatory checkpoints? And by mandatory, I mean for your staff. So generally, we like to conduct a post-move visit about a week or two after a family moves in. And then about 30 days or so after a family moves in, we want to check in with the landlord. And ideally, this is going to be after they are at least supposed to receive their first rent payment and HAP from the housing authority. And then you probably want to check in with the family twice more within the first year, maybe at 4 months and say 9 months or so. And it's a really good idea to keep an eye on the family as they get closer to lease expiration, because you want to talk to the family about their idea about staying or moving. Hopefully they'll want to stay. But if there are issues that they need to move for instance, if the family composition has changed, or if the landlord is maybe selling a property, or for some reason they can't stay there, you want to be able to assist them again in staying in an opportunity area. Ideally, this time it would be less intensive because they've already gone through the process and they have a lot of information. They're prepared to do it, but you should still offer support if you're able to. How much post-move counseling that you offer is going to depend on staffing decisions that you make, on the resources that you have. Because, again, at the end of the day, even though you want to see some retention, you want to see a good deal of retention, you really also want to focus on making the moves. And so that's going to, between the landlord outreach, which we're about to talk about, and all the pre-move counseling activities, that's really going to be the bulk of what your staff is doing. So, housing search assistance. This is really crucial, and it does require strong landlord outreach efforts, which is the fourth and final component, which we'll talk about next. But there are a lot of ways that you can look at housing search assistance, and these are listed here. So available units, and what that means is that your staff is finding units available in opportunity areas and providing families with contact information for those landlords, but also potentially doing the outreach themselves. So commonly providing transportation to see units, or even doing neighborhood tours of opportunity areas is part of housing search assistance. Assisting with the application process, assisting with the process of viewing units, communicating with potential landlords about the program on behalf of a family, and also providing encouragement to families who are searching for housing, because it can be challenging and more difficult because there's maybe fewer landlords, or they're not familiar with opportunities, and so you just want to be able to provide encouragement as needed. Again, you need to think about how much effort and resources you put here. Now, again, on the low level, you'll need to provide things with information about how to find housing. So you might just post listings or hand out listings, make listings available. Or you might host meet and greets for landlords that you know operate in opportunity areas and participants in your voucher program. But, you know, if you're able to, you should provide more robust search assistance, such as calling landlords on a client's behalf, scheduling open houses for program participants. And what we've done regarding that is if we work with a landlord and they say, hey, we've got a 3-bedroom home coming, and we might say, okay, well, let's pick a date that we can have. I know I have 4 families looking for a 3-bedroom in that area, so let me have a day, and let's do 15-minute increments maybe, where everyone come at the same time to see the property, and then you'll have applications available. Families will come with their information, their rent histories, their credit histories, or references, and if a family likes the property, they can apply on the spot. So those kinds of creative things, ideas can help families locate housing. Providing transportation to units, again, as I've already mentioned. And you want to help keep families focused on why they want to move to opportunity areas, because there can be times when they're discouraged. Next, we will talk about that 4th and final component of a mobility program, which is landlord outreach. So how much outreach you do is likely going to dictate or impact the success of your program more than any of the other 4 or 3 components that we've gone over. And this is going to depend on your local housing market. So think about, when you think about landlord outreach, and you want to think about getting landlords to hear about your program, to want to participate in the program and rent to your families, a good place to start is communities of opportunity that families participating in your overall voucher program already live in. That's going to give you kind of a head start on landlords that you know are going to be inviting to families with the voucher. So I should say here that in some jurisdictions across the country, not many but some, there are protections in place that prohibit discrimination based on a source of income or public assistance, and we commonly relate those things to having a voucher, so how you pay for your housing in terms of source of income. So if your jurisdiction has those source of income protections, then it's not, depending on how it's enforced, you might not need to worry about whether a landlord does or doesn't accept the voucher. But for jurisdictions that don't have those protections, again, starting with landlords that you already know accept the voucher in opportunity areas is key and can make your job a little bit easier. Now, what you can also do with those landlords is not only seek to utilize their available housing, but also ask them to connect you with networks of landlords or groups that they participate in, other landlords that they know rent housing in similar communities. Think about contacting property management companies or real estate organizations in your area that you can work with. So make presentations at meetings, you can send letters, and do all kinds of things to cultivate a positive relationship with groups that you're able to make contact with, either a lot of different properties or a lot of different housing providers in terms of landlords and property owners. You're going to be researching public listings, and so we already know about the listings services such as Craigslist or the different websites that people can advertise rental housing on. So you're going to be using those and contacting landlords and explaining your program, encouraging them to be interested about your program. We always do, when we talk about landlord outreach, we always have a landlord brochure that can explain the program. We go to events, we hand them out, we hand out our business cards, and we talk about what our program is and how it can be good for managers. Now let me offer one key for effective landlord outreach that I found is maybe one of the most important, which is getting outside of your building. Again, this is going to depend on the staff you have to dedicate to this task and your resources, but get into the communities that you've identified as opportunity communities. Walk around, drive around, see the for rent signs, go into the local real estate offices, property management offices, have face-to-face conversations, build relationships. I can't emphasize that enough. When you're doing landlord outreach, there's a good amount that you can do from an office, from a desk, from a computer and a phone, but you really want to be able to get out into that community as well. And so just like we've talked about incentives for families to participate, also you should consider incentives for landlords. So in terms of the HCV leasing process, think about how you can make the process simpler for landlords in opportunity areas. What administrative relief can you offer these landlords? And obviously, it goes without saying, but money talks. And that's what landlords care about. Landlords want to lease their properties quickly, and they want to get paid and make a profit as much as possible. That doesn't mean that you're going to be paying excessive rents or making excessive housing assistance payments. But what that does mean is you need to make sure that to the extent possible within the framework of your program that you're offering competitive rents for properties. You need to understand the local housing market, and your families, again, need to be competitive. One of the things that we would do in programs, and it's really important, but before a family even starts to, before a family maybe makes contact, or if a property manager or a landlord comes to us and says they have a property and we know what they're asking for in rent, on the back end, given a family's income, given your payment standards, given whatever deductions that you're making available to families, you can figure out what's affordable for a household. And so we would do this all the time for every single property, and sometimes we would do the spreadsheet, and once we get to a number that's affordable for the family, if we're talking about, this was the 2-year program that I mentioned was at an MTW agency, and so their families paid between 26 and 28% of their income towards their housing and utility costs, and so we were able to do that. But also, sometimes families would need to pay more. So can I make this affordable at 30%, and can I make this affordable at maybe a little bit of a higher payment standard? So if your payment standard, and this is work that you'll have to do beforehand, but if your payment standard, say, is set at 98% of the FMR, then maybe in certain areas you need exception payment standards. Maybe you need to go to 100 in certain areas, or can you make this affordable at 103%? So those are all things to kind of consider in order to be competitive. And I can't really emphasize enough, but when we talk about staff and resources, really this is not something that you can do kind of quickly. This is something that takes effort. You may need to designate a landlord outreach specialist or hire a landlord outreach specialist. Can you even hire a part-time housing locator? What one program did that we were working with is they hired a housing locator that was a realtor, and they were able to work out an arrangement where they didn't have to pay this individual, but this individual was paid in commissions from the individual renting the property. And so that's one idea there. Also, again, with collaboration, are there local organizations already providing these kinds of services? Can you form partnerships? That's, again, a theme that's going to be common and crucial to your success, because obviously housing authorities are operating with limited means in terms of finances, and so you want to maximize your collaborations and partnerships wherever possible. So those are the 4 components, and really the last piece about this overview is going to be measuring success. So, and by measuring success, yes, we're talking about data. So I know a lot of people in the housing world, at housing authorities, if data is not your specialty, it can sound scary, but we all do in terms of agencies and HCV departments, some level of reporting. And so if there's someone that's familiar with it. And so I said to say, don't be afraid, just understand this is something that is necessary, but that you can master easily. So your two main uses of data are going to be evaluation and improvement, which is an internal process, and talking up your success, which is an external process. So you need to think about, as you're designing your program, you need to think about what you need to record. What data do you need to collect? Obviously, you want to get that bottom line number of, are you reaching your goal? And so if your goal is to move families to opportunity areas, you might set a number goal for 50 in a year or greater, less, depending on your program. And you want to know if you're getting there. But what else do you want to record? You want to think about what goes into each of those moves, and you want to measure your effectiveness at every step. So, for example, how many families express interest in your program if you're doing that by a referral form, or you're doing that by taking attendance at the workshops or phone calls that you're getting? However you're measuring that, that's going to tell you, or it's going to provide a measure of your success in marketing and outreach. How many families are completing your counseling program if you set it up that you have a program that families are completing? It goes without saying that the fewer families completing counseling the fewer families completing counseling means fewer families are making moves to opportunity areas. You might want to track how much families are saving towards moving costs and security deposits. Another idea, how many landlords did you speak with, or how many properties did your families visit? You need to develop your data collection and reporting tools before you start your program. And you need to use the data. So don't just collect it and have it sitting somewhere for a year-end report, but use it to manage your program, to improve your program. If it's within your means, you might invest in a client management or an information management system, or you might just need to add a module to whatever system of record you're using. But if that's outside of what you're able to do, there's still a lot that can be done with tools you probably already have access to, such as Excel and Google Docs. When I managed the mobility program, the regional mobility program in Southeast Pennsylvania, I had the counselors filling out weekly reports on everything from outreach efforts, so how many families did they talk to at a voucher briefing, how many people called into the office, how many counseling sessions were had, how many families made goal plans, how many visits did we do to available units, how many landlords did we call, and obviously how many moves were made, how many leasing packages were submitted to the housing authority. All kinds of things. And so that was on a weekly basis, and then I would compile everything into a monthly report, again using Excel. Yeah, this is a little bit time intensive, and it takes effort, and you got to make sure the data is valid, but really having the ability to manage your program, to improve your program, and to talk about your program successes, that has a much greater value than the cost it's going to take you to collect and manage all this information. So, as we're closing this mobility overview, I want to raise 3 points that are really going to point you in the direction of having a successful program. So one, think regionally. We didn't cover this before because it's not necessary for a successful program, but it's a big theme with housing authorities now. For example, I and a couple colleagues of mine went to HUD at the end of August because they were having meetings of their advisory committee for the MTW expansion that's should be happening very soon. And one of the things that was really important for committee members kind of dictate or deciding, advising HUD on the future of this expansion is regionalization. So how can housing authorities share costs? How can the housing authorities mirror policies across jurisdiction lines to make it easier both for families and landlords? There was also recently a hearing in Congress about impacting or benefiting really small PHAs, and again there was a similar theme there about housing authorities across jurisdictions and within the same region working together and collaborating and sharing some functions, even some administrative functions. So think about that. It might not be realistic for your agency depending on geography, and it might not be realistic for other reasons, but it's something at least that you should think about. These partnerships are really going to, I think, be something that HUD is pushing agencies to consider, probably softly at first and then, you know, firmly sometime in the further future, but we'll see what happens. You never know how things are going to change in the future. So number 2, emphasize partnerships. And I've talked about collaboration since really the beginning of this webinar, but these again can be particularly valuable if you have limited staff or other resources to support your mobility program. Think about organizations that are already performing either counseling work or fair housing work and discuss ways to collaborate. I mentioned earlier local planning organizations. I mentioned colleges to provide some data analysis and mapping services. There are a number of other ways that you can look at this in terms of collaboration, but think about that. Who's active in your community and how can you form effective partnerships? Lastly is you've got to make staffing decisions. So you might decide to outsource some of all of the work of the mobility program, or you might manage it completely in-house. But if you've got staff that are going to be working on this, you have to make sure that they're dedicated to this and that they're skilled. Mobility programs, the successful operation thereof take really a specialized knowledge which people can learn. Certainly, it's not necessarily complicated, but you've got to understand the goals and you've got to understand the methods. And the work of a mobility program is a little bit different than the work of your normal HCV department in that the goals are different. With your HCV specialists and your eligibility folk, your leasing folk, they're just concerned about doing things according to your policy to complete whatever tasks are ahead of them. Mobility oftentimes is about creativity. It's about figuring out how to work within your agency's framework to benefit both the client in terms of moving to opportunity, but also making this a good experience for the landlord. So that's a key that you have to understand. This be something in terms of working on a mobility program cannot be something that's really one of a dozen other things on somebody's plate. And so it's really important that people understand that and that your staff, whoever is working on this project, is doing so and that they're dedicated and this is their core task. Depending on how many people you want to serve, how many moves you want to make, what kind of services you want to provide is going to determine how many staff you need, in addition to how many resources you have at your disposal to dedicate staff towards these tasks. And with that, we have really reached the end of the webinar. Now there's a function here for individuals to send questions in if they have them. So at this time, if anyone has any, you're free to do that. I'll leave it open for a couple of minutes. But here we have our website, which probably I'm guessing most people have seen because they found the webinar. My direct email is there if you want to email any follow-up questions offline, or if you're interested in talking about engaging Quadell in some services, either mobility related or not. As you'll see on our website, we have a whole host of affordable housing services that we offer. And so I encourage you to peruse the website. I encourage you to send me any messages that you have. But it's really been a pleasure, and I hope that you have all learned something important and valuable today and are thinking about operating mobility programs in your jurisdiction. So with that, I'll see if any questions come in. But if you don't have any questions, you're free to leave the webinar or stick around and see if some questions start coming in. But thank you all again for your attendance today. All right, well, having not received any questions, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you very much. Again, please visit our website. Feel free to shoot me an email